There's a truth I want us to acknowledge. Being alone can be one of the cruelest tests of modern life. And it's not because of the absence of others, it's because of the inevitable presence of oneself. When silence takes the place of everyday noise, when there's no one around to distract or validate us, something profound emerges. It's a discomfort, an unease, a sense of emptiness that can no longer be ignored. This emptiness isn't new, it's always been present, just disguised under commitments, hurried relationships, and endless notifications. The truth is, loneliness reveals what we spend our lives trying to hide, the distance between who we truly are and who we think we should be. And it's precisely in that space that anguish resides. It's not the lack of company that destroys us, but the lack of connection with ourselves. Søren Kierkegaard, one of the greatest divers into the human soul, saw this anguish as the symptom of an existence that has yet to find its truth. For him, the despair we feel when we are alone isn't an emotional failure, but a spiritual alert, a call to authenticity. Loneliness is the mirror where we are forced to confront the freedom of being ourselves and the responsibility that comes with it. We flee from silence because it exposes us, because it reveals how lost we still are from ourselves. On the other side of this deep dive, Arthur Schopenhauer offers a radically different yet complementary perspective. He doesn't fear solitude, he celebrates it. For Schopenhauer, the ability to be alone isn't a weakness, but a mark of greatness. It's a sign of a mind that doesn't need external noise to feel alive. In his view, solitude is the refuge of elevated spirits, those who aren't content with the mediocrity of distractions, those who have found a home and a fortress within themselves. This video is an invitation to traverse between these two shores, between the emptiness of loneliness and the fullness of solitude, between fleeing from oneself and the courage to inhabit oneself. Because what you feel, this silent discomfort, this pain that's hard to name, it isn't a mistake. It's a sign, an urgent request for you to stop running, stop losing yourself in others, and finally begin to return home, to within yourself.
Here, I don't offer easy consolation. What I offer is clarity, a direct, unmasked look at what it means to be alone and how this experience, when well understood, can become the most liberating of your life. If you've made it this far, it's because something in you is tired of fleeing, and perhaps, just perhaps, you are ready for the truth. The emptiness you feel isn't loneliness, it's a longing for yourself. For many, loneliness is perceived as an emotional burden, but for Søren Kierkegaard, it's much more than that. It's an existential mirror. Loneliness is the experience of being face to face with oneself, without excuses, distractions, or personas. And this encounter can be devastating when we spend our lives entirely committed to the task of being anything but who we truly are. According to Kierkegaard, the human being lives in constant tension between the real self and the idealized self. Instead of seeking our own truth, we prefer to adapt to the demands of a world that values appearances, status, and performance. We create an identity to survive socially, and then we cling to it as if it were true. But in the silence of loneliness, this facade begins to crumble, and when we have no one left to perform for, all that remains is the discomfort of realizing how far we are from ourselves. It is at this point that what Kierkegaard called existential despair arises, a state of suffering not caused by external events, but by the internal perception of being at odds with our essence. Despair is the inevitable result of self-denial. It's not fleeting sadness, it's a silent abyss between what we are and what we pretend to be. Loneliness lays bare this abyss because it eliminates the noise that used to muffle it. And as paradoxical as it may seem, this despair is a starting point.
Kierkegaard saw it as a call to individual responsibility. Being alone is not the end, it is the beginning. It is in this uncomfortable void that the true work can begin, the work of becoming oneself. For him, a human being only achieves authenticity when they stop fleeing from themselves and accept the weight and the freedom of being who they are. But this process is not smooth. It requires courage to dive into the unknown that exists within us. It requires humility to admit that we don't know who we are, and persistence to keep searching nonetheless. It requires the willingness to abandon the mask, the character, the self we have constructed to please others or survive expectations. Loneliness, therefore, is a test. It forces you to answer a question that most prefer to ignore. Who are you when no one is watching? And even more, can you sustain your own company, or are you always fleeing? Kierkegaard warns us, fleeing from silence is fleeing from truth, and the consequence of this flight is living a life without roots, without meaning, without authenticity, a life where one is always surrounded, but never truly present. But what if, instead of fleeing from loneliness, we learn to see it as a door? What if, instead of resisting silence, we learn to inhabit it? This is where another perspective comes in, not that of anguish as an alarm, but that of solitude as a conquest. And no one spoke of this more clearly than Arthur Schopenhauer. In the next part, we will dive into his view on the power of being alone, and why for him this isn't a sign of weakness, but of inner strength. While Kierkegaard makes us look inward with anguish and urgency, Arthur Schopenhauer invites us to remain in that interior with dignity and lucidity. For him, being alone isn't an undesirable condition, but an affirmation of greatness. In his sharp words and relentless philosophy, Schopenhauer breaks with the romantic view of life and society and exposes a truth that many don't want to hear. The deeper an individual is, the more he distances himself from the superficiality of the masses, and this inevitably leads him to solitude. In his Aphorisms on the Wisdom of Life, Schopenhauer states that elevated minds seek solitude not as an escape, but as a refuge from mediocrity. For him, continuous interaction with others tends to be exhausting, noisy, and numbing. The common man distracts himself, agitates, and feeds off the constant presence of others because he fears the emptiness of silence.
The wise man, on the other hand, finds in silence a source of renewal. He is self-sufficient, not because he is cold or insensitive, but because he has learned to sustain himself with what he has inside, and not with what he receives from outside. This type of presence isn't built with motivational phrases or promises of instant self-knowledge. It requires refinement. It demands time, discipline, and a profound honesty with oneself. Schopenhauer knew this, and that's why he didn't offer consolation. He offered confrontation. His thought is a direct blow against the neurotic need for social approval. He said that those who need to be surrounded all the time to feel alive have not yet discovered their own depth. And that's why solitude in his philosophy is a sign of strength, not because it isolates, but because it reveals. It shows who is capable of existing fully without depending on others' applause, conditioned affection, or the noise that anesthetizes. The authentic solitary for Schopenhauer is one who has become his own universe. He doesn't close himself off out of disdain for others, but out of awareness of the scarcity of depth in the outside world. This view, however, is not without sacrifices. Being alone requires enduring oneself, and for many, this is the hardest task of all. Because when everything falls silent, the internal monsters scream. And it is precisely there that the true test begins. Can you coexist with your own thoughts, with your memories, your frustrations, your emptiness? Or do you need others all the time to avoid that confrontation? Schopenhauer shows us that those who master the art of solitude are those who have transformed their own interior into a habitable place, a sanctuary, a space for reflection, clarity, and power. And this is not learned in the rush, in the crowd, or in easy applause. It is learned in silence, in discomfort, in the patience of rebuilding oneself from within. But there is a point where Kierkegaard and Schopenhauer meet. Both knew that being alone can become unbearable when there is an internal void that has not yet been faced. Both knew that loneliness only transforms into solitude when there is something inside capable of filling that space. And this is precisely what leads us to the next inevitable question. Why do we feel such an intense emptiness when we are alone? What is inside us, or what is missing that makes silence hurt so much? In the next part, we will explore the roots of this emptiness, not only from a philosophical perspective, but also a psychological one.
Inner emptiness isn't simply the absence of something. It's the constant presence of a lack, a silent hole that we can't fill no matter how hard we try. It appears in long nights, lonely Sundays, in the pauses between one notification and another. And the most distressing part is that it can't be resolved with company, money, or distraction because it's not outside, it's inside. The pain we feel when we are alone doesn't come merely from loneliness itself, but from the collapse of all the distractions we use to escape from ourselves. And when those distractions disappear, what remains is a brutal realization. Perhaps I have lived this far away from who I truly am. This emptiness is, in fact, the echo of my absence within myself. Psychology helps us understand this in depth. From an early age, we're conditioned to seek external validation. We're told what success is, what beauty is, what love is, what's accepted. We grow up trying to fit into these molds, adapting our behavior, our emotions, even our desires. And in this process, we lose touch with our essence. We learn to perform, but unlearn to feel. The result of this is an internal dissonance. We create an identity projected for the world, functional, adaptable, efficient, but that isn't authentic. When we're surrounded by stimuli, this identity works well, but when the world falls silent, when the house is empty, when the phone screen goes dark, it crumbles. And what appears behind it is what has been silenced for years: the wounded child, the forgotten desire, the fear never faced, the unprocessed frustration. This is the true emptiness, the gap between who we are and who we allow ourselves to be. And that's why it hurts so much, because it carries the weight of all the renunciations we made out of fear of not being accepted. It charges us a very high emotional bill for having ignored our own truths.
But there's something even deeper. Emptiness can also be a symptom of a life without inner direction. When we live only reacting to the world, chasing after others' expectations without our own compass, the soul begins to empty, because the soul needs meaning, presence, purpose. And when all of this is replaced by empty goals, constant comparisons, and a frantic search for approval, the result is inevitable. We lose ourselves. The inner emptiness, then, isn't something to be avoided at all costs. It's a sign, a symptom, a message from the unconscious saying, something is wrong here. It forces you to stop, to listen, to investigate, and above all, to rebuild. And this leads us to the next stage of the journey, the process of converting loneliness into solitude, where emptiness ceases to be lack and becomes space, where being alone ceases to be suffering and becomes a choice. In the next part, you'll learn how to transform this painful silence into a healing.
Converting loneliness into solitude. The transformation of loneliness into solitude doesn't happen by magic. It requires work, confrontation, and above all, a willingness to look inward with brutal honesty. The The difference between loneliness and solitude lies in how we relate to being alone. In loneliness, we are victims of silence. In solitude, we become masters of it. Loneliness is absence. Solitude is presence, but a presence that arises from self-knowledge and emotional maturity. This process begins, first and foremost, with acceptance. Accepting that there's a void, accepting that pain exists, accepting that you've lost yourself, without judging, without punishing yourself. This is the first step, because as long as you resist what you feel, you'll continue trying to numb your pain with empty distractions. And it's in this cycle that loneliness feeds and perpetuates itself. Acceptance is the 0 point of reconstruction. After that comes the dive. And this dive is not pleasant. Being alone with oneself in deep silence is an exercise in courage. It's sitting in the center of your own labyrinth and listening to the noises of the mind, the cries of the soul, the forgotten traumas, and the truths we avoid. But it's also in this dive that the encounter with wholeness begins. Solitude isn't just being alone, it's inhabiting oneself with fullness. It's learning to sustain your own company with dignity. A fundamental practice in this process is self-listening. Stopping, breathing, observing what you feel without filtering, without justifying. Writing, reflecting, questioning. What do I truly lack? What am I expecting from others that I could offer to myself? What makes me run so much, seek so much, fill so much? These questions hurt, but they open doors. They disarm the mechanisms of escape and bring light into the chaos.
True solitude also requires the creation of inner space, and this space is built with habits that favor presence, deep reading, conscious silence, contemplation of nature, meditation, art, study, acts that connect you with what is eternal, with what doesn't depend on anything external to make sense. When you cultivate this space, you begin to realize that being alone isn't a punishment, it's a privilege. It's in solitude that the most powerful ideas are born, the most mature decisions are made, and the most sincere connections with what truly matters are formed. But beware, solitude isn't emotional isolation. It's not about shutting yourself off from the world, but about no longer depending on it to exist. It's the difference between being with others by choice and not by necessity, between loving out of overflow and not out of need. Those who inhabit solitude don't flee from relationships. They live them more truthfully because they no longer need them to fill internal voids. Transforming loneliness into solitude is, therefore, an act of intimate revolution. It's changing the quality of your presence. It's transforming silence into a home. It's realizing that you are not alone, you are with yourself. And this, when well cultivated, is more than enough. But to live this transformation, one must be aware of a subtle yet powerful enemy, the compulsion to flee from oneself. Even when we try to walk this path, we are constantly seduced by distractions, immediate desires, modern vices, and digital illusions. It's these forces that sabotage our inner reunion and push us back into the void. And it is exactly about this that we will talk in the next part, the danger of fleeing from oneself, and how this escape is, in fact, the silent origin of all emotional suffering. If what you're hearing resonates with you, you'll find real value in my ebook, Beyond the Shadow. It breaks down Jung's core ideas and gives you tools to understand yourself more deeply. The link is in the pinned comment.
Fleeing from yourself. You may be surrounded by people with 1,000 commitments, a full schedule, and a busy feed, and still be in deep flight from yourself. In fact, this is the most common portrait of modern life, a grand spectacle of collective distraction. We flee from ourselves all the time. We escape through excessive work, The need for constant productivity, emotional dependency, compulsive consumption, social media, and lifestyle addictions disguised as habits. Every new stimulus is a way to silence the inner voice that insists on asking, "Who are you?" when everything stops. And that is the question we fear the most, because deep down we know that what we will find may not live up to the image we have created for the world. This escape has a cost. It exacts a high price in the form of chronic anxiety, nameless anguish, and a constant feeling that something is missing. Because when you distance yourself from yourself, everything you try to build loses depth. Your relationships become superficial. Your goals become empty. Your days turn into a sequence of automatic movements without a soul. It's like living in a beautifully decorated house, but completely empty inside. The philosopher Kierkegaard called this silent despair, the state in which the individual lives as if pretending that everything is fine, while inside feeling that something essential has been lost. And the scariest part, most people live this way without even realizing it. The flight from oneself is so subtle, so integrated into daily life, that it has already been normalized. We've learned to live disconnected from our essence, as if it were natural. But it's not. And as long as this disconnection continues, no relationship will fill, no success will satisfy, no achievement will heal, because nothing outside of you can replace what is missing inside. True freedom begins when you stop running, when you have the courage to stay, when you look at yourself not with judgment, but with curiosity, not with fear, but with a willingness to understand who you are, without masks, without filters, without lies. This is the turning point, the moment you decide that you will no longer live as a fugitive from yourself, that you are willing to listen to what your loneliness is trying to say, that you will face your emptiness with maturity and responsibility, and that you will no longer depend on external noise to feel alive.
But this decision requires strength, because when you stop fleeing, you begin to see, and what you see is often uncomfortable. It is at this moment that you need structure, direction, tools, because facing yourself is just the beginning. The next step is to build a new relationship with yourself, a solid, deep, and true relationship. Being alone doesn't have to be a burden. It can be a choice. It can be a return. It can be a new beginning. Loneliness hurts, yes, when it is filled with absence, escape, and despair. But when it is cultivated with awareness, it transforms into solitude, that rare state where the presence of oneself is enough, strong, and nourishing. It is in this state that you learn to think clearly, to feel deeply, and to live authentically. Kierkegaard showed you that anguish is a call to truth. Schopenhauer taught you that being alone can be a sign of greatness, not of lack. Psychology revealed to you that emptiness is not a flaw, it is a symptom. And I invited you at every step to face all of this with courage, without looking away, without hiding behind distractions. You can continue losing yourself in the ruins of noise, or you can choose to build yourself in silence. You can keep depending on others to feel whole, or you can make solitude your inner fortress. And I assure you, those who learn to be enough for themselves never accept crumbs again, not from the world, not from relationships, not from themselves. And now, I want to hear from you. Write in the comments, what have you learned about yourself in this video? You don't need to have all the answers. Sometimes even an honest question is a great start. Sharing your reflection can help others who are also on this journey. If this conversation touched you, if something inside you awakened, subscribe to the channel. Here, we don't provide ready-made formulas or easy shortcuts. We offer awareness, clarity, and provocation. Keep watching. The next step is important.